Okay, here it is, your explosive short-form growth roadmap. We're going to have a deep dive, like I say, we're going to get stuck into the theory first. You're probably feeling a little bit frustrated. You probably think that you've tried absolutely everything and your content just isn't performing. Maybe you're stuck around, 200 to 600 views. Maybe you've had one that's just taken off, but you just can't replicate it. Well, we're going to fix that today. You might think that you don't have the tools or the knowledge, but by the end of this, you definitely will. And, we've had students already that have just absolutely exploded their views with just an iPhone and a really simple concept. Rebecca only uses her iPhone, she has a mic that she uses, and she's really, really new to editing, and yet all her videos are kind of doing 100,000 plus at this point, and she's growing really fast on a brand new channel. So if you think that the algorithm is against you, and that's what's preventing you, then you're probably right. But there is an easy fix to it. You see, the problem is, it's looking for something really specific, and at the minute, your content just isn't providing it. So the algorithm almost is against you at that point because you're not giving it what it needs. But by the end of this, we're going to have established the number one issue 99% of creators have on social media. We're going to look at how to fix that. I'm going to explain to you why you're more like Picasso than you realise, and why in the context of social media that is a total bad thing. And I'm also going to give you my 6-step system. It's harder to say than you think. And it's going to allow you to sort of beat out the creators in your niche or area that you're probably more credible and more talented than, but they're stealing all the views from you, and you're going to regain those views back. We're just restoring balance on the internet at this point. So first of all, why me? Why am I well positioned to kind of give you this information and get you to where you need to be? Well, that's my granddad holding me there, and that's me holding a bottle of Grolsch. He gave me that. He was a big proud Dutchman, and his only vice was that he did used to get me drunk a lot as a toddler, I suppose. That's what shaped me into this viral content machine, I would argue. And the byproduct is that my main channel here, this is sort of old data really, but in the first 3 months of it, it got nearly 10 million views. And the first video did 2.5 million views, and it just continued to grow and grow. I then just replicated that on another channel just to see if I could bottle up that magic and, utilise it again. Came off the back of leaving sort of a big music deal that I had and realising how things could just be snatched away from me really quickly. So it's important to me now to be able to just replicate things quite systematically and know that people can't take things off me again. So even if my channels disappeared tomorrow, I'd just make a new one and I'd be back on top in no time, and that was important to me. So this did 500,000 views in the first 3 weeks. Within 11 videos, it had, over 8 days, it had done 1 million views. And it has continued to grow again, like the other one. And I used social media to scale my business from nothing to 10k in the first few months. No one was more surprised than me, but I've looked back on it and now it makes total sense. And again, I'm able to replicate that, which is important to me. And to top it all off, I'm actually a friggin' full-blown teacher, which I bet there's not many people on the internet trying to deliver educational content that could actually say that. Most of them are no good shysters and charlatans, but not me. I'm a friggin' full-blown teacher. And even in passing, when I've given this information to people, they've just 10x the views with it straight away with very little input from me. So I know it works, and I've just been able to go on to then teach people to do this repeatedly and just get big results on new channels from the first video, and drastically improve everything they're doing and improve their lives as well. So first of all, I need to clarify a huge lie that you've probably been told. If you've taken any other courses or you've done any research on what might make a video go viral before this, you've probably been told that actually it's just a strong hook and a payoff that makes your content go viral. Now, I'm not suggesting that you don't need to sort of hook people in and pay off the content, and we're going to get into that in far more detail. But although it's a good editing structure, it's not the full picture when you're just told that alone. And I'm part of quite a lot of communities and groups and things where there's a lot of creators in, and they believe that they just need this hook and this payoff, and yet they're just totally flabbergasted when the content doesn't take off. And actually, when I look at it, it's usually pretty obvious once you know the stuff I'm going to teach you. Whilst we're at it then, before we get stuck in, what you need to know is you need to know retention is king. End of story. That's the only thing these algorithms are bothered about. People stopping and watching your content for a long time. And my retention statistics that I share with my one-to-one clients and stuff are actually pretty phenomenal. And it paints a really clear picture when you see all that data laid out. So I'm telling you without reasonable doubt that retention is king. And that's the thing that we're focused on. Over 20 million plus views, I've got 5% engagement, which means that 95% of people just passively watch that content. Now, there is a place for engagement, and I'll talk about that later. But again, it's just not a driving factor when we're talking about views. It does impact other things. It does actually impact retention in some way, shape and form, which we'll get into. And it does actually help build community and things like that. But it isn't the thing that's actually going to make content go viral. It's the thing that's probably going to convert people long term, but not cold audiences. They're not going to care about that. So, couple other things. Post times on TikTok are absolutely irrelevant. I just post whenever I feel like it. My first video, it did 2.5 million views, but it didn't do its first million views till after a month. So realistically, the time that I posted it, a month later, it wasn't even been taken into consideration. Another thing, I use the same description in every video. I do sort of utilise the description a little bit as a bit of real estate, but I don't sort of rely on it or put really any importance on it. I use the same one in every video that I post on Halves. And the other thing is I just haven't posted in weeks and I still have 99 plus notifications most days, even months later. And I think what's important to realise when you're talking about that is people will tell you that you just need to post consistent. And I do think that being consistent plays a part, but just not in the way that people think. You need to consistently deliver that same value, but it's not how frequently you deliver that value. Anyone who's telling you to post sort of consistently 3 times a day or 5 times a week or whatever, it's just not true. It just doesn't have the impacts and the impetus that people make out that it does, because actually what they're not taking into account is the shelf life on a really good piece of content. So if your content has a really low shelf life, it's probably because it just wasn't good enough in the first place. So I don't want you to stress out about how many videos you're posting at first. I do in some respects, because you need to be testing quick. But what you need to remember is, sadly, it's not a game of like the hardest workers win. It's the most strategic players get the views. So what are you doing wrong, apart from maybe some of them things, focusing on some of them things we've just spoke about? Well, to sort of explain what you're doing wrong, we need to talk about this guy. So this is Picasso. And at the minute, you're more like Picasso than you realise. But in this context, it's a bad thing. Because Picasso made 150,000 pieces of artwork or something in his lifetime over like 80 years. Presumably some of that time he was a baby. Presumably some of that time he was an old man and not as capable. So it was kind of in that middle bit that he made all those pieces. It averages to something absolutely ridiculous every day, like 800 pieces a day or something mental. I can't remember off the top of my head. All you need to know is it's impressive. However, when you actually think about it, we only really talk about 6 of them maybe. So it's actually not that impressive. And we didn't really start talking about them until after he died, which isn't a great business model if you think about it. But sadly, it's the business model that a lot of people are applying to social media, in that they're just trying to churn out loads and loads of videos and hope that some of them will stick. So personally, I think that is the wrong way to go. I think you test quick, you find the things that work, and then you just double down on them. If you want to make your 150,000 pieces of content, be my guest. We might only talk about them after you're dead, and you might not make any money though. So that's what you've got to remember. And the other thing is, you've got to let go of it being such a creative process, and you've got to think about it in terms of what you want your results to be. Here's the big issue. When most people approach me, they say the same thing. I've tried everything. Now, just to explain what actually is happening, we need to talk about cookies. So if you were to make a chocolate chip cookie and you were to make an oatmeal cookie, you've made 2 different cookies, but you're still just making frigging cookies. Do you know what I mean? And this is what's happening when people are approaching me. They're saying, I've tried everything. Actually, what they've done is they've just made loads of variations of the same video. And usually the only thing they're experimenting with is that hook, that verbal hook. And it's not enough. There's a million variables that you can change. Why would that be the only one that that you put any importance on. So at the minute, you're married to the wrong idea. And the quicker that you can divorce those ideas and you can just test quicker and you can just not have that emotional attachment to this creative thing you're making, then the quicker you can test, the quicker you're going to find the thing that works. So the solution, if you're just baking cookies, try a different frigging cake. Try a Victoria sponge. Maybe you try a frigging cheeky Battenberg, I don't know. But you just need to get away from making the same thing over and over again, just with slight tweaks to, say, the verbal hook. And if you look at all of these pictures here, these are different formats. This is a faceless one first, then you've got like a podcast style format that we've done in the past. That one is sort of more talking head. You've got stranger content. You've got all these different things that you can get stuck into, but you need to be testing different formats for your ideas. And that'll get you out of what I call the toxic creator cycle. Because at the minute what you're doing is you just think, if I get the views, I can drive everything else, whether it's sponsorships, affiliates, business, whatever it is, selling products. And you just think, if I get those views, I can make that happen. So you just put everything into trying to get those views. Then when you don't get those views, you feel really disheartened and frustrated. So you double down on effort, you double down on time, you double down on, money and finance and upgrading equipment. And then you don't get them views again, and then it hurts even more because you've invested so much more. So then you have to invest even more because you're at the point of no return, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And you just never get out of this cycle of trying to beat the algorithm and get these views and all the rest of it. And it doesn't have to be like that. So what you actually need to do is find a really simple, digestible idea that's going to be the most repeatable content format to create and simple to create, so you can maximize your output and maximize your reach. And you need to remove any guesswork and experimentation at that point, and you just need to know that you're going to get sustainable and predictable outcomes. And if you're not getting that, you're still in that testing phase. And depending on how you test, you could be stuck in that for years and years and years if you get that wrong. Initially, I would say it's not about 1 million views. It's about being able to get 10k plus views repeatedly. Because I know from experience that something that's doing 600 views is really hard to get to even 10,000 views, let alone 1 million. Whereas something that's doing 10k views, if you just tweak it slightly, it probably can do 1 million. And the distance to travel is far less between 10k and 1 million than it is even between 1,000 and 10k. So you need to first find that thing that's almost like a 10k plus format. And then from there, you can move on and try and tweak. If you're trying to granularly analyze things before that point, you're on a road to nowhere. So once you get those videos that are doing that, that's when you can then start to build on that. But you need to set some parameters and rules for when you're going to move on. So like for me, like I say, if something doesn't do 10k plus, if a format and an idea doesn't do 10k plus, I just abandon it and I just try a new format and idea. And I don't have that emotional attachment like I used to have. When I was a musician making sort of music-based content, I could never get it to work, and it was because I just absolutely couldn't sacrifice on what I was making musically. So it was taking too long and I was too emotionally invested. If I went back now to that, I would change my approach entirely, and I would still have that investment in the music, but how I would present it online and the things that I would do to get seen in the first place would be entirely different. And I realise now that the product isn't the content. You need to set some rules. You don't have to be as brutal as me. You don't have to necessarily say 10k plus. You might want to make 3 or 4 of every video as well, but just don't make 100 of them if they're not working. So that brings us on to how you find that format and this create system. So number 1 is the concept bigger than the brand. And I know they're just words, so I'm going to explain what that means. But the product isn't the content, like I just explained. With music, for example, the song didn't have to be the content. Or if you think you're the product, it doesn't have to be the content. Or if you're physically selling a product, it doesn't necessarily have to be the content. It might be if it's engaging enough, but it doesn't have to be. And that's one mindset shift that you're going to have to make. The best creators are known for a single concept when you think about it, right? And I have a simple formula for finding it that I use every time. And I've never really given this to anyone outside of my one-to-ones. But I think that the whole channel should be able to be described in a single sentence. And I have this single sentence test that I use to decide whether or not a concept is going to work. And if I could describe the channel as the guy or the guys who X, then I know that it's going to be a good concept, or it has the potential to be a good concept. And I use the term guy gender neutrally because it actually came off the back of just a text chain with a friend of mine. If you think about halves, I'm just the guy who cuts stuff in half. That's it. It's as simple as that. So if you think about Unpatched, we're the guys who do the Battle of the Bands. So I'd been thinking about this for a while anyway, and I'd kind of had this epiphany in the bath, because I have all my good ideas in the bath. Halves I came up with in the bath as well. But Jack, who's actually on Unpatched with me, he sent me this text saying, have you seen the good band name, bad band name guy? And I was like, no, but can you see how it fits that formula? When I actually looked at it, what was really, really interesting was the guy actually played in a band that Jack and I like. So Jack actually knew the guy, knew he played in this band. And I said to him, oh, do you realise it's such and such? When he saw him, he was like, oh, yeah. But the concept was so powerful, he didn't even recognise him. He just recognised the concept. It lived within its own right. So when he shared it, he shared the concept, not the person. And that is the massive, massive secret to planning your whole content. Beyond that, when you get that concept, you need to refine your mindset. And we've kind of spoke about it throughout this, but it's testing quicker and it's making sure that you look for conversion over creativity. So don't be a Picasso. Don't make 100 of the wrong video because you're so attached to an idea that you've had. Just trial the idea, and if the audience doesn't like the idea, it's just tough titties. You might absolutely love it, but if they don't love it, you just need to move on. It's this idea of, what do you want the outcome to be? You want the outcome to be views that lead to leads and sales and whatever else. You know, and it goes back to that first question of why do you want to be seen? And if you want to be seen for a particular outcome, the only way you're going to do that is if you make content that converts, not really creative content that you're emotionally attached to. So that is another thing that you're going to have to get over. And I've had this conversation with clients, and then straight away, before we've even got into working together one-to-one, they've just sent me texts like this. You know, believe me, you've already got my brain working 1,000% differently. And then Rebecca's content blew up almost straight away after this conversation. We'd only had one meet, I think, and her content blew up. So next, which is going to be a whole lesson in itself, but I'm going to touch on it here, is executing packaging for the platform. And it's about understanding how each shot of the video is going to impact the viewer and the retention and make people stay till the end. And we're going to talk about that in the next lesson, like I say. And these guys came to me and they just asked me, you know, why isn't my content performing? And we just had a quick conversation, and straight away they were able to, like I said, to 10x the views. And all I sort of said to them was just some really quick observations, like contextualize your content. So, you know, if you're talking about nutrition and food like they were, she was a really, really experienced and qualified nutritionist with like 10,000 plus clients, and she knew what she was talking about. But a cold audience didn't know that. So they had to contextualize better. So they started to film in the kitchen. I told them to make food the focus and not necessarily themselves or her background. You know, embed that credibility, but make the food the hero. I said to him the channel could be faceless. We didn't actually go for that. They leveraged the fact they were a family, but they didn't reference it. That was just something that we spoke about. And, you know, the right content doesn't require you to call out a target audience, like I've mentioned. We're trying to cast the widest possible net, and you'll just find them automatically. And sometimes you don't really know exactly who your audience is, or sometimes people might fall into your avatars or your audience that you weren't even expecting. So by casting the widest possible net, like I say, you're just gonna reach them. You're just gonna find them, and that's what I've always found to be true, and that's what's drove my business. Like I said, Dalmon, we've mentioned, another example of someone who just put this into practice and it just worked straight away. Her goals were to use the comments to inform this murder mystery series that she was writing. She's a writer, and create a world and community that people would love. We started a brand new channel really, really recently. If you went to go look at it now, it's in its infancy, but you'll see every video is performing amazingly. And if you go to her comments, you'll see that obviously it's doing exactly what we set out to do. So this is an example where engagement sort of was important. Also, I'm going to touch on this, but while people are reading these comments, the video's playing in the background, so it helps with retention, things like that. But you've got to think about what your goals are, and you can start to embed that in the content. But you're going to do that as an after fact. You're going to package for the platform first, and then just embed your credibility and your trust and things like that. And then once you're in a position where you've got your format and you've found a way to package it up, then you just need to make sure it's really repeatable by putting it into a content recipe that you can just keep rinsing and repeating. Again, we'll talk about this in the next lesson, but you're just going to get these insights that just allow you to sort of make this recipe. You're going to get ingredients that kind of form this recipe, and then you're not going to have to really script anything or plan anything in detail. And I have kind of a zero script planning approach to all my content. If I have to script it, it's not going to be repeatable enough for me because time's limited. So you can see this video did 2.5 million views, and this is all the planning I did for it. And the way that I do it is I have this 2 variable planning system where I only ever want 2 variables that I'm going to change, and it's never the hook. Most people are changing the hook. For me, it isn't. So like for halves, for example, all I'm ever changing is what I'm cutting with and what I'm cutting. So I was using a Japanese handsaw to cut a cheeseburger, because why friggin' wouldn't you? And then once you've done that, you need to test and track performance. Like I say, make your rule book. Know when you're going to move on. Know that when you look at your data, you're gonna sort of use that and be informed by it, so that you can make this simple, digestible idea, most repeatable content for maximum reach. And then evaluate that data, and the things you want to be looking at are the overall average retention here. Obviously you can see it on this graph too, the percentage that watch the full video, but then also the duration of the video impacts these 2 things as well. Obviously the longer a video is, the lower that these can sort of afford to be, but they still don't want to be low. You still want them as high as possible. And obviously the best outcome is obviously you get the longest video with the highest watch time, and that's going to explode that video. But when you're evaluating your data, that's what you want to be looking at. And like I say, I track all my data. We use it, so much for our one-to-one clients, so that we can really gauge how a video is doing straight away within the first sort of couple of hours. And we know, right, that didn't work. Let's not get, caught up on it. Let's move on to something else. But like I say, these 2 are going to be impacted by this. If this is a lot shorter, these need to be a lot higher. And that's it. That's the create system. It's the concept bigger than the brand. Refine your mindset. Execute packaging for the platform. Apply your unique content recipe when you get that far. Test and track performance, and then evaluate that data. And if you do all that, that's all the theory behind what was going to create a viral video. Now we're going to move on to the practical element of it, the packaging for the platform, where we're going to look at how you actually apply that to the filming and the editing, so that your piece of content is something that's going to stop people in their tracks and make them watch the whole video. And if you do that, obviously you're going to get the views, and we're going to talk about that in the next lesson.